Abandoned shopping malls have become some of the most popular places for urban explorers. Thousands of people walk through them every year looking for old stores, forgotten food courts, empty movie theaters, and pieces of history left behind after the doors closed for good. Most of the time, that's all they find. Dust, broken glass, graffiti, silence. But malls are different from most abandoned buildings. They're enormous. They contain miles of hallways, hidden maintenance corridors, underground storage areas, employee-only passages, loading docks, and countless places where someone could remain completely unseen. The 3 stories you're about to hear all begin the same way. A routine day exploring an abandoned shopping mall, and they all end with the same terrifying realization. They weren't exploring those buildings alone. These are 3 scary true horror stories from abandoned shopping malls. This happened back in October of last year. I usually stayed away from dangerous locations, but when I heard that an old shopping mall about 2 hours from my city was scheduled for demolition, I figured it was worth the drive. The place had been closed for almost 15 years. I left home around 6 in the morning so I could get there shortly after sunrise. I remember the weather perfectly because it had rained the night before. The roads were still wet, and there was a thick fog hanging over the fields during most of the drive. By the time I pulled into the empty parking lot, the fog had mostly burned off, leaving behind a cold gray morning. The mall looked enormous. Even after sitting abandoned for so long, you could tell it had once been a busy place. The faded department store logos were still attached to the walls, weeds had grown through cracks in the pavement, and hundreds of shopping carts sat rusting together near what used to be the grocery entrance. I grabbed my backpack, camera, extra batteries, flashlight, and respirator before heading toward an opening in a broken service entrance. The inside smelled exactly how you'd expect. Mold, wet concrete, dust, rotting wood. Every sound echoed for what felt like forever. For the first 45 minutes, everything was exactly what I expected. Empty storefronts, broken glass, food court tables stacked upside down, old sale banners hanging from the ceiling. I filmed everything, talking to the camera like I always did. Eventually I reached the old department store that had once anchored the west side of the mall. It was much darker than the rest of the building. Most of the skylights above had collapsed years earlier, letting rain pour in. Entire sections of the ceiling had fallen onto the sales floor. Mannequins without arms or heads were scattered everywhere beneath layers of dust. Toward the back of the store, behind the old employee changing rooms, I found something I hadn't expected. An employee elevator. The inspection certificate beside it read 2011. The paper was yellow and peeling. I pressed the button mostly as a joke. To my surprise, the light above the button turned green. A second later, somewhere below me, I heard machinery groan to life. The elevator actually came up. I stood there staring at it. Part of me knew I shouldn't get inside. If it failed halfway down, nobody would know where I was. But curiosity got the better of me. The elevator descended slowly, shaking hard enough to make the ceiling panels rattle. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into complete darkness. My flashlight revealed what looked like an underground warehouse, stretching farther than I could see. Metal storage racks lined endless aisles. Old Christmas decorations still sat inside unopened boxes. Broken mannequins leaned against shelves. Plastic reindeer, artificial trees, store displays. Everything was covered in dust. Except one thing, fresh shopping cart tracks. The wheels had left clean lines through the dust. They couldn't have been more than a day or 2 old. I remember crouching down and touching one of the tracks with my glove. The dust was still loose around the edges. Someone had pushed that cart recently. I should have turned around right then. Instead, I followed the tracks. They led through several aisles before stopping outside a small maintenance room tucked into the corner of the basement. The door was open. Inside was a folding table, a battery-powered lantern, a camping chair, a sleeping bag, several empty cans of soup, and a coffee mug. Steam wasn't coming off it anymore, but when I picked it up, it was still warm. My stomach dropped. Someone had been here minutes earlier. Sitting beside the mug was a spiral notebook. Thinking maybe it belonged to another explorer, I opened it. Most of the pages were filled with random notes, dates, and lists of supplies. The final page had only one sentence written across the top. Someone came down here today. He's still walking around." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because I assumed another explorer was trying to scare whoever found it. I flipped to the next page. There was only one line. "He's reading this now." Every hair on my arm stood up. At almost the exact same moment, the lantern went out. My flashlight was suddenly the only light left. Then even that died. Not flickered, died. The basement became completely black. I couldn't see my own hand. For a few seconds there was absolute silence. Then I heard something echoing somewhere between the storage aisles. The slow squeak of shopping cart wheels. Metal rattling, rolling across concrete. It wasn't moving fast. It sounded like someone casually pushing it. Closer, then stopping, then rolling again. I didn't wait to find out who was pushing it. I turned and ran. I crashed into shelves, knocked over plastic displays, dropped my backpack. I don't even remember reaching the elevator. I found the staircase by accident and climbed until my legs gave out. When I finally reached daylight, I didn't stop running until I was back at my car. Halfway home, I realized my camera was gone. I must have dropped it in the basement. For weeks, I debated going back. I never did. About 6 months later, another urban explorer uploaded footage from the same mall. I watched it out of curiosity. Near the end of his video, as he walked through the basement with his flashlight, for less than a second, lying beside an abandoned shopping cart, was my camera, exactly where I left it. The strange part wasn't that it was still there. The strange part was that the camera strap had been neatly wrapped around it. I know for a fact I dropped it while running. I've explored a lot of abandoned places over the years, but there's one location I've never talked about publicly until now, mostly because I still don't know what to make of it. Back in early 2023, 2 friends and I drove just under 2 hours to explore an abandoned shopping mall that had been sitting empty since around 2010. It was scheduled for demolition later that year, so we figured it was our last chance to see it before it disappeared forever. There were 3 of us. Me, my friend Tyler, and his younger brother Mason. Tyler and I had explored dozens of abandoned buildings before, but Mason was new to it. He was 20 years old, and mostly came along because he wanted to take pictures. The mall sat at the end of a deserted commercial district, where almost every business had shut down years earlier. Even the parking lot looked forgotten. Trees were growing through the asphalt. Light poles leaned at strange angles. The only other thing we noticed when we arrived was a white cargo van parked on the opposite side of the lot. No company logo, no license plate on the front. We joked that another group of explorers probably got there before us. We grabbed our gear and headed inside through a broken loading dock door. For the first hour, nothing happened. We walked through old clothing stores covered in graffiti. The food court was filled with collapsed ceiling tiles. A fountain in the center court had long since dried up and was full of trash and broken glass. It was exactly what you'd expect. The deeper we went, though, the quieter everything became. Even our own footsteps sounded wrong. Every sound echoed through empty corridors and seemed to linger longer than it should have. Around noon, we reached the old movie theater attached to the mall. Mason wandered off for a minute to photograph some torn movie posters, while Tyler and I waited near the entrance. When he came back, he asked us a strange question. "Did one of you guys walk behind me?" We both said no. He shrugged and said he thought he heard footsteps matching his. We laughed it off. Old buildings make weird noises. That's part of exploring them. About 30 minutes later, we decided to start heading back. We had already filmed everything we wanted, and daylight disappears quickly inside places like that. Tyler suddenly stopped walking. He pointed his flashlight toward the dusty floor. There was another set of footprints. At first glance, they looked like ours, but after looking closer, we realized something. Our footprints were heading deeper into the mall. These were heading toward us. Someone had walked into the building after we did. That alone wasn't terrifying. Other explorers show up all the time. What bothered us was that we'd spent nearly 2 hours inside and hadn't seen or heard anyone. We kept moving. Every few minutes we'd find the same boot prints crossing another hallway, always coming from somewhere ahead, never leaving. Eventually Mason quietly asked, "Shouldn't we have passed whoever made these by now?" Nobody answered. The atmosphere changed immediately. None of us wanted to admit we were getting nervous, but our conversation stopped. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional drip of water somewhere far away. As we entered the main atrium, a loud metal crash echoed from the second floor. It sounded like one of the security gates slamming shut. The noise was so sudden that all three of us froze. We looked up. Nothing. No movement. No voices. Just silence. Tyler looked at me and simply said, "Let's go." We walked much faster after that. Then we found another set of footprints. Fresh. Right on top of ours. Whoever made them had stepped exactly where we'd stepped. Heel to heel. Toe to toe. Almost as if they were trying not to leave their own trail. I remember staring at them for several seconds before Mason quietly whispered, "They've been behind us." Nobody said another word. The three of us started moving as fast as we could without running. We reached the loading dock exit we'd used earlier. The door was still open. Sunlight poured inside. We practically jogged back to the parking lot. Our car was exactly where we'd left it. The white cargo van wasn't. We threw our gear into the trunk and got inside. As Tyler started the engine, Mason looked back toward the mall. His face had completely changed. He asked, "Which one of you stayed upstairs?" Neither of us understood what he meant. He pointed toward the second floor railing above the food court. There was someone standing there, too far away to make out clearly. Just a dark figure, completely still, watching the parking lot, watching us. Tyler immediately pulled out. None of us looked back again. Months later, while organizing photos from that day, Mason found something none of us had noticed. One of his pictures showed the hallway leading into the old movie theater. At the far end of the corridor, barely visible, was the same person, standing perfectly still. The timestamp showed the photo had been taken almost an hour before we found the footprints. Whoever they were, they had been inside the mall long before we realized we weren't alone. I've explored abandoned places for almost 8 years now. Factories, schools, hospitals, hotels. Nothing has ever happened that I couldn't explain. That's why this story still bothers me, because for the first time, I genuinely believe someone was trying to trap us. This happened in the summer of 2022. There were 4 of us, me, my longtime friend Eric, his cousin Jake, and another explorer we'd met online named Brian. Brian claimed he'd already explored this abandoned shopping mall once before. According to him, the easiest way inside was through a loading dock behind the old department store. The mall had closed sometime around 2009 after most of the anchor stores pulled out. Since then, it had become a hotspot for graffiti artists and urban explorers. We got there around 11 in the morning. The parking lot was completely empty except for our 2 cars. Brian led us around the back of the building, where a large loading door had been forced open years earlier. It was heavy enough that the wind couldn't move it. It simply stayed halfway open. As we walked inside, Jake laughed and said, "At least we know how we're getting back out." Brian laughed too. "Yeah, unless somebody closes it." It was such a random joke that none of us thought anything of it. The first few hours were honestly incredible. The mall was massive. 2 floors, hundreds of stores, a huge food court, an abandoned movie theater, even an old indoor playground that still had faded plastic slides covered in dust. We took pictures, recorded videos, talked about what the place must have looked like when it was open. It almost felt peaceful. Around 2 in the afternoon, we decided we'd seen enough. Our batteries were dying, and we were getting hungry. We headed back toward the loading dock, or at least where we thought it was. After 15 minutes of walking, Brian stopped. "Nah, this isn't right." The loading should have ended at the loading area. Instead, it ended at a solid brick wall. He insisted we'd somehow taken a wrong turn, so we doubled back. 20 more minutes. Nothing. Every corridor looked exactly the same. Closed storefronts, broken tiles, dust, silence. Eventually, we reached another emergency exit, a thick steel door with a crash bar. Eric pushed it. Nothing. Jake shoved it harder. Still nothing. I looked through the narrow gap between the door and frame. A heavy chain had been wrapped around the outside handles. Someone had chained it shut. We tried another exit, Ugh, same thing. Then another. Ugh, also chained. At this point, nobody was joking anymore. Phones had no service. The deeper parts of the mall blocked every signal. Brian started getting frustrated. He kept insisting the loading dock wasn't far away. But after another 30 minutes, we somehow ended up back at the food court. The same overturned table, the same broken vending machine, the same collapsed ceiling. We had walked in a circle. Then we heard footsteps. Not loud, not running, just slow. Measured footsteps echoing across tile somewhere beyond the empty storefronts. All four of us stopped moving. The footsteps stopped too. Eric called out, "Hello?" No answer, just silence. We waited maybe 15 seconds. Then the footsteps started again. 1, 2, 3, 4, slowly moving away. Brian whispered, "Someone else is in here." Nobody argued. We followed the sound until it disappeared. There was no one. Just another hallway, another row of empty stores, another emergency exit chained from the outside. The feeling in the mall changed completely after that. Every noise made us stop. Every shadow looked like someone standing there. About 20 minutes later, Jake grabbed my shoulder. He pointed toward an old clothing store. Someone had recently been inside. There were muddy boot prints across the dusty floor. Fresh ones, leading in, none leading out. We quietly stepped inside. Rows of rusted clothing racks stood like skeletons in the darkness. Near the back we found sleeping bags, empty water bottles, canned food, portable batteries. Someone had clearly been living there. Then we heard keys jingling, very close, right outside the entrance. The sound wasn't random, it was rhythmic, like someone slowly walking while carrying a large ring of keys. We dropped behind a display counter. Seconds later, a flashlight beam swept across the store entrance. It moved slowly, methodically, checking every corner. I could hear my own heartbeat. The flashlight stopped directly where we had entered. Then it moved away. The footsteps continued down the hallway. Nobody spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Brian whispered, "We need to leave now." We abandoned half our equipment and ran. Not full speed, fast enough to get out. After another 10 minutes, we found a fire exit whose lower hinges had rusted away years earlier. Eric kicked the bottom hard enough to bend the frame. One by one, we squeezed through the opening. When we reached the parking lot, my stomach dropped. Every tire on Brian's SUV had been slashed. All four. My car was untouched. Neither of us had parked near anyone. The lot had been empty all day. We called the police. 2 officers arrived about 40 minutes later. They walked through the mall but never found anyone. They believed squatters had been using the building and intentionally chained exits to keep people away from their living areas. That explanation made sense, mostly. But before we left, one officer asked us something strange. He wanted to know why we'd been moving furniture around. We told him we hadn't touched anything. He said every chair in the food court had been arranged into a perfect circle. Fresh drag marks were visible in the dust. None of us had even gone near those chairs. I've never gone back, not because I think the place was haunted, because I think there were people living in that mall who knew every hallway, every exit, and every blind corner. And for almost 3 hours, they let us wander around without ever letting us see them.